when we were taking down the woodshed, the many years it took me to take it down, every time I saw one that looked like, oh, that must be it, that's where it would go. So there's quite a few of them. Where's Francis? Where?
Behind.
Are there more than that?
I don't know.
Okay. You should know. Anyway, back to Elisha.
Lavinia's son.
I mean to Robert Holder Fullerton.
Edwin's
He's
sister.
Elisha Peck II's son, and Lavinia, my mother, over here, Holder. Hence, he got this name, Robert Holder Fullerton. He was the second child of that family, and there were like 13 of them. And Lavinia's always spoke about the children that died, and it was very
And he
sad.
was a very easy birth.
I slipped right out.
You were out in the field.
Some of the children that died, they were, some of his siblings that died were Abraham Bell, Amelia Alice, Lucretia Bacon. Yes.
Yeah.
They had no marking at the graveyard in Long Reach. So Hazel, who would be Robert's youngest daughter, my aunt, great aunt, put their names on Lavinia and Elisha Peck stone. So they are now recognized. And was Frank there too? Yeah. Frank Stanley? Okay. Anyway, so he was married November the 24th, 1885 at St. James Anglican Church, Long Reach, to Rebecca Middleton. Alice Rebecca Middleton. I believe, and I'm quite sure, that Robert was Methodist. The reason he did not get married at what is now Long Reach United Church is because the Anglican minister was available to marry, and there wouldn't have been a Methodist preacher around, and that there was not always their own clergy available. So that's why they got married then. And that was from Marie Hamlin, who was the granddaughter of Robert, who told me that. Anyway, I did this whole thing, and I never mentioned that he had 5 children of his own. So I'm going to mention that now before I forget, because that's where I came from too. He had George Albert Fullerton, who was my grandfather, who's sitting over there beside my grandpa Thurlow Henderson. Right there is Grandpa George. Also Frank Stanley Fullerton, who, if you know Ed Fullerton, and Bob, that was their father. Edith Lillian Anderson, she lived up in Bath, and she had 5 children.
7.
The cousins from upriver, as we call them.
7 children.
7.
Correcting you.
Edna Pearl, who lived out in Saskatchewan, she had 3 children. And Alice Hazel, who had an affair with
Did you say Kathy?
and she had 1 child.
I don't know.
She had 1 child, Marie Hamlin. So these are just recollections that I've heard through my life, as recent as this past week, about Robert Holder Fullerton. The first from my mother, Charlotte Henderson Miller Fullerton.
Not this week.
Not this week. She told me this many times, so. Mom remembers Rob, as she called him, being a remarkable at prayer. Her recollection as a child was at the Long Reach United Church, Rob bending down on one knee while holding on to the end of a pew and faithfully praying. Like he could just spew forth prayer, and Mom was always in awe of that and wished she could do the same. She never really got there. She prayed silently, I think, quite often. Another memory from my mother is that of her family, Thurlow and Grace, would often stop at Rob's after church. They were not only related, but they were also good friends. And that whatever nag horse they were driving at the time would automatically stop there whenever it went up or down the road. My uncle Kenneth Downing Fullerton, now 93 years of age and lives at Shannox in Quispamsis, grandson of Robert Holder Fullerton and son of George Albert Fullerton, recalls, and I've never experienced this in my household, but this is what he says about him. He would holler, scream, carry on over nothing, just like the old man, George Albert Fullerton. When I asked for a specific memory of Robert, Ken recounted he, Rob, had led a horse to drink water at the brook, because, you know, the barn was right by the brook. And that's how they watered their animals. And he told Ken to lead the horse back to the barn as he had to go to the bathroom. Ken refused, as he was frightened of the horse, and Ken said there was some hollering then. And Ken also made the statement, I wasn't the right Fullerton. Bob was. I looked too much like a Downing. And the Downing was his mother's last name, Vesta.
That's funny.
My Aunt Muriel Etta Anderson, daughter of George, granddaughter of Robert, recounts a memory of our HF, Robert Holder Fullerton. I was over at Graham's and Rob was taking slop to the pigs. I thought it would be a good idea to see the pigs. It was winter. I tried to step into his footsteps. Obviously, as I was only 5, I couldn't match his footsteps. He turned around and said, aren't you a little skate-thump? And she doesn't know the whole word, but it was one of those old, probably Irish or Scottish words from somewhere. The next part is about the house that I live in, which I've heard it referred to as a house with the golden windows, and it's because the sun sets, the windows look golden. They're not made of gold. There's gold within. George Albert Fullerton and Frank Stanley Fullerton, Robert's sons, cut logs off the property and hauled, probably on the ice, Jean tells me, and she's probably right, or float the logs to Jones's Creek where the logs were sawn, then shipped back and the house was built with the lumber. And I think it was 1911. We'll probably have arguments. Go ahead. I don't care. The woodshed. Now, this is going to dispute you.
I know.
Both Ken Downing Fullerton and Edward Peck Fullerton, who was Frank Stanley's son, they're Robert's grandsons, believe the woodshed was on the property when Robert Holder Fullerton bought the property. So, I don't know. Okay, the death of Robert Holder Fullerton. Ed relates this recollection of Rob's death. He dropped dead of a heart attack in the north room downstairs, what is now my dining room. Dad, Frank Stanley, and George Albert were playing potatoes, and someone yelled for them, and they saw the poor old man dead. And that was in April, and he said they were playing potatoes.
Yes.
Which I found remarkable.
No.
Say it the way Ed said it.
Yeah, we want to hear that.
Yeah, I'd do it. Really?
No, I can remember my father planted potatoes sometimes, some years in
Probably
April.
plant.
Last year we planted potatoes.
Wow.
Not all though, but some of them.
Yeah.
Muriel Etta Anderson Fullerton relates his death. She was about 5. We were all dressed in our Sunday best, and some Williams, I don't know the first name, had a truck, a motorized vehicle, and came and took the casket to the graveyard. We were all standing down by the brook on the driveway, watching the procession. Children were not expected to attend funerals in that era. Ken was holding Carol, who was the current baby. Shirley, somehow, he was ADHD, so I don't know how, ended up in the brook. Ken passed Carol to someone else and went down to help Shirley out of the brook. That was the end of Shirley's best clothes for the day. He was dressed, though, in respect for the funeral, but also there was upcoming visits after the funeral from the West Side Fullertons, Charlie and Walter, who would have been Robert Holder Fullerton's nephews, who were stopping in for tea after the funeral. Now, Muriel wonders why he would have needed help getting out of the brook, because if she was 5, he was 7, really. But anyway, it was the same year that Shirley had 3 fingers cut off by an axe, and wonders if his hand was still bandaged. But it was April.
Also, it was April. The brook could have been running quite fiercely.
And it was bigger then than what
Okay.
it is now.
Muriel also relates that the West Side Fullertons were very tall, loud, and imposing. Size and noise. Imposing in size and noise.
Short, loud, and imposing.
As I said before, he was a ship's corker, and these are some of his tools. And I even went online and found other pictures of tools. It's quite interesting. I might take up the profession. During the 1800s, the Kingston Peninsula, as we all know, was replete with shipyards. From 1826 to 1837, 265 vessels, wood boats, ships, brigantines, barks, sloops, and even steam vessels were built and launched from 3 shipyards on the Kennebecasis Bay. Justice Wetmore, Flewelling, both in Clifton, and Merritt in Moss Glen. I assume Rob was employed by these and other local shipyards. Ken and Ed recall that he worked up the St. John River as far as Gagetown, corking the scows that were used to transport cattle and hay back and forth to the islands in that area. And I'm sure he worked on those ships those holders were building too. He died in April 21st, 1862, buried with his wife Alice Rebecca Middleton Fullerton in the graveyard of Long Reach United Church.
1860, 32,